detriment. Creativity often comes sparking from other people, but also from a health perspective. These are headlines that came about 2 years ago because some major studies showed that having social isolation is just as bad as smoking cigarettes. In the UK, we now have a loneliness officer at the highest government because of how important this is. The idea of social connection, which we'll talk more about today, I have no doubt. The idea of movement and the idea of restriction and healthy relationships with technology. Technology is not going anywhere, and I know that. But are there things we can do to counteract the negative effects? Are all needed to succeed, and they succeed in this rapid-paced, volatile world. We have an epidemic of burnout and stress leave. There's simple behaviors, and when I'm going to talk about the behaviors we can do to counteract this is not rocket science. This is not going above and beyond. It might be so simple that it's effective. Companies all over the world are doing things to try to develop some healthy relationships with technology. This is a consulting firm out of Holland that actually has the desk attached to wires, so at 6 p.m. the whole desk goes up to the ceiling. Done. Work's done. In France, it's illegal to send your employees emails after hours. So there's this idea that you're allowed to disconnect. We have, culturally, there's breaks and there's things that we've developed over the world to kind of mitigate this. Whether or not they were developed a long time ago, but they're allowing for this idea of break from technology. And this is an example from a website of a Belgian company. We respect the right to be inaccessible. So for a world that's pushing to be connected all the time and to have this immediacy and this demand sensitivity and must respond right away, companies are seeing the positive effects of actually allowing their employees to recover and what that brings to the workplace. So what can companies do about it? And I'm going to give some ideas and very specific examples, but I'll tell you this. If leadership does not buy into this idea at the highest level, it won't happen. So being able to get leaders with the education and why this matters to their employees, to their bottom line. I know, this is amazing, right? Effective breaks. What does that mean? We all take breaks. We can't hold a cognitive load for extended periods of time without taking breaks. The issue is most of us take ineffective breaks. So if we think of something like technology and what we're trying to do. So with technology, there's two parts of the brain that are incredibly engaged when we're doing it. One is called the cingulate, the other is called the amygdala. The cingulate responsible for emotional regulation, decision-making, things like that, and the amygdala responsible for stress. What we're trying to do in an effective break is turn off those areas and turn on other areas of the brain. When we rest or when we recover, our brain is still very active. So during sleep, which is obviously a great recovery period, your brain is actually more active than when you're awake. It's different parts. So that's what we're trying to accomplish when we talk about effective breaks. Can we turn on one part of the brain, turn on another, and allow that part of the brain that's active to repair, recover, renew? So effective breaks are offering this idea of respite or recovery and adding energy. And then ineffective breaks would be something that would take it away. I'll give you an example. When we're working and we take a break by going to social media or going to Netflix, this is another thing that engages the same part of the brain. So it's an ineffective break. The other thing about social media and Netflix and YouTube and a lot of these sites is they have no stop cues. There's always a feed. There's always a next show to watch. So it's actually developed these very bad habits for us where we don't have a cue to stop, which is why we're seeing such an expansion of the time spent on these mediums. I'll give you an example. In Canada, the average in 2013, so this is before streaming services, the average amount of TV watched per night was 4 hours and 20 minutes before streaming. in Dubai, the average amount somebody spends on social media a day is 3 hours and 20 minutes. So when is this happening? Is this during work? Is this after work? How can we get it so it becomes a useful period of time or an effective break? Breaks are intentional or unintentional. The most effective breaks are intentional. I plan to take some time to do X, Y, Z. What often happens is you'll be working on something, an email comes in, you switch tasks and take a break from that first behavior, but you're engaging in something that's unintentional and actually working the same parts of the brain. So what I'm encouraging is to think about these intentional breaks. How do you work that into your day? Myself and my research team just did a large systematic review of 33,000 studies written of in-work breaks, so during work hour breaks of knowledge workers. After windowing that down and looking for quality studies, it can be separated into these buckets. So an effective break, to simplify it, is when you connect with yourself, connect with nature, or connect with others, which I'll go through. The other thing that is absolutely required is being able to shift your attention from what you're doing with work or stress or technology to be present with these behaviors. If you're not, that's not psychologically disconnecting. If you are connecting with others, you're standing and you're talking to somebody, but you're still thinking about work, it is not an effective break. So connecting with yourself, and what we're seeing around the world is things like nap rooms, meditation education or classes, which are incredibly effective, gyms in the environment, music. We think of something like movement. There's been some great studies done that show that just walking 30 minutes a day actually increases productivity by 20 to 30%. If that was a pill that could increase productivity like that, we'd be handing it out like candy. But it's a simple behavior as walking. Connecting with others and having that social connection. I'll give you an example. There's many things you can do in a company to be able to do this. This is one that has such a high ROI. Volunteering. Volunteering as a company. So Behaviour is a Canadian company. There's now offices all over the world that look at volunteer programs for companies, but they also have their own volunteer program. So what they get people to do, and think about engaging those that are distant workers or working by themselves and bringing them out of social isolation for a volunteer experience where you're giving and altruistic. It also can create meaningful work. So if you're not connecting to your job necessarily, but you have this idea and this system of this volunteer effort that means something to you, that will actually be associated with the company as well. So within Behaviour, for Behaviour employees, when they volunteer, they get paid 21 Canadian dollars an hour. And what happens to that, it actually gets put into an account that they're allowed to donate to a charity of their choice. We know the gratitude and implications of donation and giving, and then you're adding that element of socialization on top of that with that volunteer effort. It's shown more engagement, less turnover in companies, just by doing good within the community. So for the amount that it costs the company, the ROI is huge. Another example that I've seen that I love is doing what they call coffee roulette, and they create 1 hour or half an hour per week where you meet with somebody from the company and have coffee with them. And what they've seen is that socialization, that bond, that engagement that it creates decreases turnover, increases engagement. But from a business standpoint, you get senior leaders meeting with young employees and getting that youth and getting those ideas and bringing them in to what they can do as a company. And then if you think of what the young employee is getting, they're getting FaceTime with a leader that they normally wouldn't get. So it's something that's simple, but can bring a lot of engagement into a company. And then connecting with nature. Connecting with nature is one of the easiest things you can do to really kind of disengage those active parts of the brain with technology. It increases the level of mindfulness or awareness and present. And it's being incorporated into companies all over the world when they design their campuses, that they involve some sort of nature aspect right into their everyday. There's been studies as simple as having a plant at your desk can improve productivity and measures of happiness. A plant. The other things that companies are doing, like I said, they're incorporating nature into their environment or into their campus or into their building. Or gardening, creating a gardening program. Again, this allows socialization, if it's a vegetable or fruit garden, even better. But it's low cost, effective use of this idea of breaks, socialization, engagement, and decreasing turnover. Simple concept, bring your dog to work. It's now used by many major companies because as soon as, I don't know what happens in the human brain, but as soon as they see a dog, it's this idea that it completely shuts off that stress response, and there's a therapeutic effect. Simple behavior, high return. So why don't we take breaks? Why doesn't this happen? Simple concept. There's a lot of this idea of fear of missing out or guilt that comes from taking time off of work. So it needs to be influenced by the top and by the culture of the organization. It needs to be something that's rewarded. We do what we're rewarded for. That's how habits work. Very rarely will somebody be like, good job for taking that break. It's usually good job for putting in those long hours, good job for getting that done. And we put this value on hours worked instead of productivity. So if you want to incorporate this, if we want to think about our effective breaks, it does need to be from the top, and it does need to be in the culture. When I talk about developing habits, the habit I'm introducing, as simple as it is, it's to take breaks. The other reason why people don't end up doing it is they forget. Demands take over, life takes over, that to-do list gets stronger. So you have to develop cues in your life to be able to engage in this. One of the reasons that dogs are such a great idea to be able to take a break and to have those cues is because they'll whine, they'll bark, they'll make you notice them. Another great cue to be able to initiate the behavior of being present, social interaction, or putting technology away is dinner time. Anytime you're eating with somebody, making sure that your devices are down. I've gone into restaurants all over the world where every single person at the table is on their phone. When you have your phone, and there's research to show this now, when you have your phone, so even if you're taking pictures of what you're seeing, you do not experience it. So the psychological effects you would see of seeing something beautiful, a scenery, for example, nature, if you look at it and experience it through your phone, you do not get the same psychological effects. So, taking these cues and thinking about where in your life does this make sense, where you disengage and you make sure that you completely disengage from technology. Another thing, and I'll pick on dinner with, there's so many people that say, I need to be home for dinner, I want to be home for dinner with my family. And then they sit there and they're half at work still and half with their family, and they're just doing two things poorly. When I talk about psychologically disconnecting or these effective breaks, you need to become present in the activity you're doing. And we often tell people to pay attention, to focus, to be present. We very rarely teach them how to do that. So in order to support this idea of effective breaks, in order to get the most out of the employees that you do have for yourself, effective breaks are required. They're not a nice to have, they're not a laziness, they're required. The amount of stress and burnout we're seeing is making that unbelievably evident. To integrate this into a culture, to make this work at work, is being able to create the environment, to construct the environment, and it's either like from an education standpoint or from an actual, garden idea, and create that culture that supports breaks and understands the utility of them. To get the most productivity, you have to take breaks. Our brain functions best between sprints and rests. Sprints and rests. Our brains are not able to function at their peak from a marathon perspective or a long period of time. As mentioned, if the leadership is not involved, if this is not something that's sold at the top, it won't happen. This is something I study within wellness programs across corporations. If the leadership doesn't buy in, they're wasting money on these programs. If the leadership buys in, they are expanding that program. They're getting more for the money that they already invested. And giving specific leadership training, because leadership, as we know, involves more demand, more stress, and requires a more concentrated, focused effort on breaks and on what that means. One of the things about leaders that they deem as a competitive advantage is they're able to really strategize about the future or learn from the past. But it is pivotal and required for sustainability, for health, to be able to be present in what that means. And to that point, managing attention training. We are paying our employees for their attention. It's what we have. It is our currency. Attention is what we have to give to our employer or a job. It's what we have to give to our spouse, a loved one, a passion. It's our attention. And often we are blindly and compulsively giving our attention to technology. So if you know where your attention is, if you are doing things and actively engaged and conscious about where that attention is going, you'll be leading towards whatever your definition of success is. Thank you so much.